Hey, this is D Knight.
This is Ty.
And Carol is tending to her husband who fell off a ladder and broke his hand. Ha ha. And you're listening to the Pardon the Insurrection podcast, where we're not being paid by Russian agents to tell you disinformation and spread lies and rumors and misinformation. Yeah, obviously, it's been just one of those weeks where it's nonstop information. Just the deluge of insanity on and on. Trump admitting on stage that he sexually assaulted a woman. He's been doing so since 1979. Extraordinarily strange. And in a conversation about, the instances surrounding the E. Jean Carroll case, that was extraordinarily weird. So his criminal sentencing for the 34 felonies in New York, that got postponed to November, not out of some kind of, it's not Judge Merchan in that instance going out of his way to help Trump. It's just unfortunate set of circumstances here with what the Supreme Court did, intervening in Trump's criminal cases, creating new law from scratch that touched all of Trump's criminal cases somehow, even ones that had nothing to do with his time in office, and that presented a situation where we're at the point where Judge Merchan had to make a ruling about whether or not the information used in the trial affected the trial in any way, and also handled the sentencing. And then because Alvin Bragg didn't just fight for a more coherent time frame in terms of Trump getting sentenced, Merchan was just like, hey, we got to do this, this, and this. And it's also possible that, this will likely set up Trump for an appeal. I'm just going to schedule the sentencing for this date. Just so happens to be, a week after the election is what it is, or a couple weeks. Don't make too much of that. Like, in all likelihood, I think if Merchan wasn't planning on sentencing Trump to prison time, that there wouldn't have been a delay, because there wouldn't have been any issues to haggle over or to have.
That's what somebody had mentioned, because that didn't cross my mind, and I go, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
one, I think that Merchan is pretty confident that Trump's going to lose, and he's pretty confident that he's going to jail. So
I don't think Merchan's making any decisions based on whether or not Trump will or won't win the election. I think it's just, Trump's lawyers engaging in these delay tactics that have been extraordinarily successful in moving things closer and closer to the election, and then arguing that, hey, this stuff is happening near the election, it's to affect the election, when really they're the cause of the delay. But, again, it's just one instance that happened to help Trump, and to a small degree. But again, obviously, the fact that the sentencing is hanging over him still isn't good. So I wouldn't really make too much out of it. It's unfortunate, but, we always knew.
But now they're whining because it's delayed. I mean, Sean Hannity was they need to sentence him because the wind was taken out of their sails as far as election. It's like every argument.
Well, yes, no matter what happened, they were going to complain. It's always a strategy of heads you win, tails I lose in this regard. Where it's bad faith arguments. If Judge Merchan had sentenced him, they'd be complaining. If he doesn't sentence him, they're complaining about that. Like,
Trump wants to be sentenced. He wants to be sentenced so he can appeal the sentence, and then he can raise more money.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Obviously, anything that would seemingly hurt Trump's chances of maintaining his freedom would be good for his finances in terms of giving him something to complain about and fundraise off of. So you take that away. I mean, I guess in terms of whether this is a help or hurt to Trump, it's a wash. But beyond that, so last week you may not have heard a couple of Russians who worked for RT were indicted by the Department of Justice for funding a right-wing media outlet that's actually founded here in Nashville, Tennessee. Ty, you take it away.
Right. Tim Fool. 2 Russian state media employees were charged with conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act and money laundering after funneling $10 million to a Tennessee-based online media company, later identified to be Tenet Media. That number represents almost 90% of their bank deposits.
All right, little inside baseball here. So I wrote up some notes on this real quick, and I spelled funneling, funnel.
I knew
wrong.
what you were saying. I could have
just
done
in
a
case
Trump.
you were like wondering what that was.
Yeah, fun along,
fun along money. Yeah, in case you were wondering about that FaceTime ad. All right, Ty, continue.
Tenet Media launched as a self-described network of heterodox commentators that focus on Western political and cultural issues, featuring 6 right-wing prominent media personalities, including Tim Pool, formerly of Vice Media, Benny Johnson, formerly of BuzzFeed, Dave Rubin, formerly of the formerly Progressive Network, The Young Turks, Laura Southern, Taylor Hanson.
We'll talk about them
Christensen
real quickly. So there's always this situation where it seems like these left-leaning, quote unquote, progressive networks end up going so far left that they veer into the same sorts of disinformation the right-wing networks and media outlets, quote unquote, veer into. That's by design. That's not a coincidence. That happens for a reason, because as you can see, Tim Pool worked for Vice, Benny Johnson, BuzzFeed. It's not a coincidence that these former seemingly left-wing media outlet employees ended up in right-wing disinformation circles. But yeah, continue. Sorry.
Prosecutors said the 2 RT Russia Today employees and the 2 Tenet founders began soliciting 2 commentators for work on behalf of an Edward Gregorian around February 2023. One of the personalities said he would need $5 million annually for him to be interested in creating videos for the fake persona Gregorian. The other, identified, needed $100,000 per weekly episode to make it worth his while, according to the indictment.
Yeah, this is funny. So in the setting up of this media outlet, they were basically funded by Russia from the beginning. They went in and approached all these right-wing nut jobs that you may know from Twitter, if that's the social media platform you use the most, like Tim Pool, obviously, Dave Rubin featured prominently, Benny Johnson, he's a fucking moron. I mean, he's Tim Pool is a moron, but Benny Johnson is like the dumbest of dumb. He has like a thin veneer of intelligence and sophistication, which just makes his content seem
that is the one thing that he has over Tim Pool, because Tim Pool just
doesn't even
like
have the veneer.
And he looks like a clown. Benny Johnson, at least you look at Benny Johnson's profile picture, he kind of reminds me of Colin Rugg a little bit.
Yeah.
What he presents himself as. Yeah. And so, when you're looking at it, like you said, it's a thin veneer of some sort of
sophistication until he opens his mouth.
Sophistication and an intellect.
It's not great. So the founders basically got in touch with these guys from RT, got this money to go recruit these guys. And when Tim Pool started asking, hey, where's this money coming from? The Russians made up this guy, Edward Gregorian, and in emails back and forth, they're like, he was working for this, finance company or something. They were spelling the name wrong in the emails, and I'm like, this is just clearly an op. And so the founders clearly knew this. I mean, at one point they were supposed to have a meeting. I think it was supposedly 7, 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And when the guys didn't show up, they started Googling time in Russia, and it was oh, it's 4 o'clock. They're probably asleep. It's all this incriminating information in the indictment to suggest that, the founders, Chin and Donovan, knew that they were, basically acting as Russian stooges and probably acting illegally, but they haven't been indicted yet. But we'll continue on. Ty, after you.
In one instance, the Russian funders directly asked Chin in late March 23 to blame Ukraine and the United States for a terrorist attack on a concert hall outside of Moscow that killed more than 130 people. ISIS took immediate responsibility for the attack, but Vladimir Putin insisted Ukraine had a role in the massacre. Kiev denied any role in the massacre. Prosecutors said Tenet's founders admitted to each other in their private communications that their investors, quote unquote, were in truth and in fact the Russians. At one point, Chen searched for time in Moscow on Google while awaiting a response to a message.
Yeah, they were clearly aware of what the deal was, like to the point where their private communications are extraordinarily revealing. And in case you were wondering if like these Russia Today guys who were running this operation to infect Tenet Media were successful, I mean, like the host would argue that they had complete editorial control, but then on the other hand, you have numerous clips like this.
They know it. But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong. I know you've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
Yeah, sounds like straight out of the can Russian propaganda to me. Now, they weren't necessarily so successful in getting the hosts of these various YouTube channels and Twitter pages or whatsoever to outright spew pro-Russia propaganda, but a lot of the editorial slant was to present information falsely that would at the very least hurt American interests, create chaos or dysfunction or stoke racism, or just in overall likelihood lead to a situation that favors Russia, not by necessarily causing people to believe that Russia's good, but just creating enough strife and division so that they could divide and splinter the nation in terms of just public perception in ways that benefited Russia. Obviously, so they were removed from YouTube not long after the indictment, and since like the company has folded, so it's entirely possible that the $10 million that they've received from Russia over the course of the past year was a large source of their funding, and they probably couldn't function otherwise. And if that's not the case, then it's also likely that given the founders and what appears to be obvious signs of knowledge of guilt, not being indicted, or at least openly, it suggests they might be cooperating with the feds, and they shut down the media organization as part of some kind of arrangement that they have with the FBI. I mean, I would assume they're cooperating. Likely this isn't going to turn into some huge indictment of, say Trump co-conspirators from other potential plots like the fake elector plot on January 6th. But you never know what these guys know, because like the right-wing media propaganda arm, that thing works like as a part of a structure that also includes Republican members of Congress and right-wing billionaires, and it's incestuous. So you never know necessarily what an indictment like this could lead to, because everything over there is interconnected. Like they accuse us of being paid shills when they're the ones literally taking the money from Russia. It's fucking bananas.
Literally. And I think this is going to go up. The Tim Pools and the Benny Johnsons and Lauren Chins right now, they're like, it's like the January 6th of the fake electors. They're down here. It goes up. I'm saying it goes all the way to Tucker. I'm saying it goes to Tulsi. It goes to Elon, who promoted Tenet on X-Chan.
Yeah, he was one of their favorite Twitter, co-conspirators, I guess, constantly retweeting them and replying to their shit, no matter how absurdly ridiculous it was. Yep. And also, so Lauren Chin, a bit of an influencer herself. I think she had this job at, Blaze Media. So since the indictment, she's since lost her editorial position over there. It's just, unfortunate for them. That's what you get for being a Russian asset. But, the Russian collusion narrative, it never stops because the Russian collusion itself actually never stopped. And we have also had development last week with the Justice Department. They charged a Russian-born U.S. citizen and former advisor to Trump's 2016 campaign with working for sanctioned Russian state television network and laundering the proceeds. It sounds awfully familiar, right? The indictment was announced Thursday and alleged that Dmitry Simes, you might know that name from the Mueller report from back in 2018. He and his wife received over $1 million, and I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. He and his wife received over $1 million, a personal car and driver, and a stipend for a Moscow apartment in exchange for work they did for Russia's Channel One since June of 2022. That network was sanctioned by the U.S. in 2022 over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Simes and his wife, Anastasia, they have a home in Huntley, Virginia that was searched by federal agents a few weeks ago and they're currently believed to be residing in Russia. Now, Anastasia Simes, she was also charged with buying arts and antiquities for a sanctioned Russian oligarch, Alexander Udodov. Yeah, sorry. These Russian names, they give me some tough. And then storing the works in their home in Virginia before they were shipped to Russia. Now, I personally believe that search a couple of weeks ago that we talked about here on the podcast, while yes, it was probably directly related to these items and that Anastasia Simes were procuring for the Russian oligarch, is likely also some connections to some counterintelligence surveillance that was being done on likely the entire family, given their connections to both political campaigns and Russian intelligence services here abroad. We'll talk about the connections to the Trump campaign in 2016 momentarily, but Simes led a Washington think tank, the Center for the National Interest, that was primarily featured in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. And he had numerous interactions with Trump campaign officials, including an instance where Simes sent Jared Kushner a letter detailing potential talking points for Trump about Russia and also passed along derogatory information about Bill Clinton that was then forwarded to other representatives of the campaign. The CNI, the Center for National Intelligence, was founded by former President Richard Nixon, which is already a mar. It started off the wrong foot. That organization helped arrange a foreign policy speech that you might remember at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, at which Simes introduced Trump and where Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak was present. Also, the CNI was responsible for that. I think they helped organize some kind of town hall where you remember, what was the Russian agent's name with the red hair when she was like fucking all the Republicans to try and like cozy
Not Maria Butina.
Yeah, Maria Butina.
Maria Butina? I didn't know she was fucking everybody.
Maria Butina. Yeah, she was fucking everybody. Not everybody, but she had a list. She was going down the list. They were responsible in part for organizing this town hall in which Trump actually called on Butina to ask a question. Like they set it all up so that she would be picked by Trump to ask a question. I think it was something by Hillary Clinton. I can't remember. There's video of it out there. You can just hit up the YouTube for that if you like. Just the level of incest in that regard between all of the Russian agents surrounding the Trump campaign and this guy, Dmitry Simes, it's extraordinary. Like one of the things that I think, obviously, Mueller didn't have much of an option in this regard when it came to Bill Barr shutting down the investigation. Because let's be clear, that investigation was going on. It continued until the literal day they shut the doors on the office. Like we recently had that development where we learned about the potential Russian bribe that Trump and his campaign took. That was one of the cases being litigated by Mueller's team in court, literally until the day the office closed, even though we're just now getting developments about the nature of that investigation. I don't know if it's still ongoing. Probably not.
What they did here with the talking points, the Russian talking points leading up to the election, 2016 election, is almost exactly what was being done with the Middle East and Tom Barrett when he was working on Trump's campaign. And what he was doing was he was passing talking points regarding energy and repealing Obama policies. And he was taking Trump's speech, giving it to heads of state.
Yeah, these foreign agents, and they were like literally doing the edits and then giving it back to him.
And giving it back to him too. And they were like, okay, we need him to say this publicly in this speech. And then, because I was reading when he was under indictment, I was reading the indictment and stuff and the testimony, and that they would tell him, they was like, oh yeah, Trump did good tonight. Thank you. Because Barry was trying to get
a paycheck.
He wanted to do business over there, and he wanted to get an ambassadorship, I think, to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and this is also it's also in line with Mike Flynn trying to get those nuclear reactors going in the Middle East and to deal with the Saudis, right? So it's all this incestuous behavior where all these people are trying to get these payoff from these foreign governments and foreign dictators and foreign agents, and in exchange offering them either influence the United States or, to the point of, like in Trump's case, lifting sanctions or changing U.S. policy. But it's also not much different from like the influence operation where they're paying all these right-wing influencers to try and get them to spread Russian propaganda. But back to Robert Mueller quickly. I think one of the mistakes law enforcement made, obviously, like he didn't have much, like there wasn't much you could do with this in terms of, when Bill Barr was Attorney General, like he was killing all these investigations once Robert Mueller's office closed. But, I don't know the nature or the state of where the Justice Department was when Biden came in office. Clearly, I'm sure, Barr left a bunch of cronies in place to kind of obstruct as many things as possible, upon the Department of Justice changing hands from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. But one of the things they clearly should have done is look, now that I think about it, in March of 2021, when Garland got in office as Attorney General, what he was dealing with was a fucking disaster. There was like this massive, like the largest criminal investigation in the history of the United States ongoing in terms of rounding up people from, January 6th. And also, like in terms of like he set up this private little task force to start looking at the top of the coup. So there was that going on, and it was just like getting everything back to normal. And we were operating in the middle of a pandemic, and it was just total chaos. Couldn't get his people in place because Republican co-conspirators in the Senate were blocking his confirmations. It was a fucking nightmare. But if there's one thing I would have placed a priority on, it would have been reigniting this Russia investigation, because like one of the issues with Trump and his cronies is if they do something and they deem it successful and they don't face any consequences, they just like they go back to the bag. Like they never stop trying to repeat the thing that they believe worked for them before, even if it wasn't necessarily successful. So if the DOJ had spent more time exploring the 2016, the Russian conspiracy, even though Bill Barr killed it, and had been doing some of the shit with like Dimitri Simes and such years ago, we probably would have been in a better situation than we are now. But I mean, I guess you can't turn back the hands of time. At least they're finally trying to clean up the mess. Actually, before I move on from the Dimitri Simes thing, another issue, so under the Trump administration, obviously there was there's a lot of turnover in terms of the Attorney General. Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, eventually ended up overseeing the Mueller investigation because his boss had to recuse himself because he was also meeting with the Russians. You might have remembered that. So one of the issues with the scope of the investigation is that Rosenstein, he narrowed the investigation in terms of what Mueller can investigate, with a Russian conspiracy to simply criminal activity, right? So there was also a counterintelligence aspect of this that needed to be investigated. And those investigations don't necessarily, or even typically don't ever result in criminal charges, but they do result in intelligence operations, counterintelligence operations where you're trying to figure out the motive and the activities of the people involved in conspiracies such as these. So you monitor those, so you can kind of fight whatever the plot is. But one of the things Rosenstein did is he told the FBI that Mueller was handling the counterintelligence investigation, and he told Mueller's team the FBI was handling the counterintelligence investigation. So we don't know if there was ever actually a counterintelligence investigation of the Trump-Russia conspiracy under the Trump administration, because Rod Rosenstein was a fucking snake. May he rot in hell.
Well, that tracks. That's on brand for the administration he was in.
Extraordinarily on brand, but
wasn't enough to keep him his job.
Well, I think look, he had to get out of there. I think his leash was waning. You know, Trump was putting a lot of pressure on him to try and wrap up the investigation, and he just wasn't willing to do that. Like, he was willing to play interference to a degree, but he wasn't willing to do everything Trump wanted, including when Trump ordered him to fire Robert Mueller, and he was like, nah. Yeah. So, apart from that, the Russian tomfoolery, Tim-foolery, it never stops, Ty.
Tim-foolery.
Yeah.
I like that.
All right. The next topic, if you will.
All right. From Russian disinformation with love, the U.S. Department of Justice said it had seized 32 internet websites used by the Russian government in what the prosecutors said Wednesday was a covert campaign to interview in and influence the outcome of our country's elections. The DOJ stated the Russian-run websites covertly spread Russian government propaganda with the aim of reducing international support for Ukraine, bolstering pro-Russian policies and interests, and influencing voters in the U.S. and foreign elections, including the U.S. 2024 presidential election. The companies are allegedly operating under the direction of Sergei Kiriyenko, the first deputy chief of staff to President Vladimir Putin, and other members of the president's office. Kiriyenko directed Russian public relations companies to promote disinformation and state-sponsored narratives in a campaign to influence November's election, according to Merrick Garland. An internal planning document created by the Kremlin states that a goal of the campaign is to secure Russia's preferred outcome in the election. The sites we are seizing today were filled with Russian government propaganda that had been created by the Kremlin to reduce international support for Ukraine, bolster pro-Russian policies and interests, and influence voters in the United States and other companies. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco added that the three companies used cyber squatting, where hackers take over a seemingly familiar domain, as well as fake influencers and fake profiles to covertly promote AI-generated content and fake narratives on social media platforms. At least one of the seized domains was WashingtonPost.pm in an attempt to mimic the Washington Post website.
Your professional customer service voice is impeccable. Like, in terms of this larger plot, like, there was this like Russian intelligence service document that laid all of this out, this campaign called Good Old USA Project, because, obviously this is the Russian view on kind of American culture, what they think of the effectiveness of their disinformation campaign, the results of which would align closely with the ideas of good old boy USA, whatever you want to think about that. It's quite funny. But one of the things they were doing, apart from, this plot with paying the white wing, I can't do that all the fucking time because it's apt. But yeah, the right wing influencers and these inserting these Russian agents in close proximity to campaigns and elected officials and this other issue where they're creating these websites that appear to mimic what you would consider to be a prominent news outlet, like this thing they did with the Washington Post, where it's not WashingtonPost.com, it's WashingtonPost.pm, where it'd be like, CNN.net or something. And they're like hacking these sites, taking them over. And then they're like building these websites that kind of replicate the legitimate website, except like they would feel like they'd populate the site with these fake AI articles and such that would spread this disinformation. And they'd also have these matching campaigns on social media where they use like AI to generate these accounts and spread the fake articles. And they'd have like a whole, they'd have a whole network of bots to have these like range of replies underneath to make it seem like it's organic traffic. So it could kind of fool. It's like if you were president for Twitter in 2016, then you remember what the bot army was like and how just extraordinarily overwhelming it was, but also how kind of stupid some of the bots were. Well, they're doing the 2024 version with Chat GPT. So the bots are a lot less stupid and look more like humans upon, closer inspection, even though generally always some telltale signs. But that aside, like there's this whole campaign organized by Russian intelligence, ordered directly from the top, Putin and his aides on down, where they have a multifaceted plan to attack the 2024 election. And clearly what we're seeing by the Department of Justice is some means of kind of mitigating some of the damage that could potentially do by maybe not arresting or even charging American co-conspirators here in the United States, but putting everybody on warning that, hey, we know what's going on behind the scenes. We're looking at everything you do. Keep that in mind, especially if you're an elected official thinking of taking some money or engaging in some kind of conspiracy. Because I would imagine we're going to have a number of unsealed indictments on, November, whatever, after the election's decided.
The thing is that because there were no real consequences or finding out phase from the Mueller report, there's one thing that Republicans are, and it's fucking arrogant. Yeah. And they have been emboldened. And then Trump was in office, so they kind of had a little get out of jail free card pass or whatever you want to call it. And then after Merrick Garland was, appointed Attorney General, I think everybody was kind of, what's going to happen? And then it was like a month goes by, and nothing really,
6 months,
no fireworks really popped off.
And then by the time we got the Trump indictments, they were so limited that they didn't include any of the co-conspirators. I mean, it's extraordinarily emboldening for the bad guys.
Yeah. And so they just really, but by that time, MAGA was so brainwashed and poisoned. At that point, Russia could just pick up their ball and go home. Like the well was poisoned. The damage was done. And then you got the Marjorie Taylor Greene, who you don't have to pay her crazy ass. You don't have to pay her dumb ass.
So you say that, but I think, so part of the problem with the way right wing, the media echo chamber.
Did you say white wing?
Yeah, right. White, same thing. You know what I mean? Part of the way the echo chamber works is you do have to have a constant source of information or disinformation in that regard to feed it. Otherwise, it kind of just flames out, right? Because as you can tell, you see here now that President Biden dropped out of the 2024 election and Kamala Harris is the nominee. They don't actually really have any ammunition or information to attack Harris with. So they're kind of stumbling through the dark. And that's because apparently they've been relying on, Russian intelligence services to provide them with the information and kind of like the framing and the plot lines and everything
they need. Charisma and, the Biden crime family thing.
Right. Now that all the narratives created by Russian intelligence are out of the window, the right wingers don't have anything to rely on because they haven't been doing any real work the past 4 years and they don't know how to do this shit
unless they're having the time. They don't have the time to kind of build that. You like how Trump, he starts planting the seeds. If I don't win, the election's stolen. He repeats that for 6 months, moving up. They don't have that kind of time. So they're throwing so much shit out there and it's contradictory.
Yeah.
And it's all like they have nowhere to go.
And the reason why they're struggling so badly is because, the right-wing media outlets, they aren't actually media outlets. They're not covering developments in news. They're here to fulfill the purpose of spreading propaganda and misinformation in order to presumably help Republicans, but in some cases to help our adversaries. And without having like the sheet of information handed to them by Russian intelligence so they can read off in the fucking YouTube videos like Tim Pool does, like they're floundering. And again, with these numerous indictments here and the seizing of these websites, it makes it a little bit touch and go for, other right wing, quote unquote, media outlets to reach out to Russian intelligence and get their talking points, because you see what happens. Like it's potentially possible that not only will your handlers get indicted, but you could have a sealed indictment against you, or your friends could be cooperating with the FBI. Like it's tough. Some tough shit. But again, obviously the solution there is to just cover the news.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's that's what you could do. And before we wrap it up here, I've got one last segment, Sports Ball Minute of the Week. So in case you missed it, obviously football season started. I know you guys probably missed that if you're a sports fan like I am. I'm probably assuming, what actually is tough. I don't expect Patrick Mahomes to three-peat, but I ain't ever going to bet against that dude after what I've seen him do the last couple of years. So I'll take, the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Go ahead, go chalk. Chiefs, 49ers, maybe Chiefs or Lions and something if you want to keep it fancy. But Patrick Mahomes does have some competition in the AFC with the Dolphins coming out 1-0. But before they wrapped it up and took the victory home against, who were they playing? One of them garbage AFC South teams. I know they're garbage because I live in an AFC South city. But prior to the game, Tyreek Hill, wide receiver for the Dolphins, was traveling to the stadium and pretty close to the stadium. He was stopped by the police over some sort of traffic incident, seemingly minor traffic incident, where he eventually ended up being removed from his vehicle, restrained, put in handcuffs, and potentially assaulted by a police officer. And I have a short video clip of that.
They arrested Reed! Oh, that's great. Oh, that's fucking Calais Campbell right there. They arrested Reed!
So as you can see there, it appeared as though one of the officers laid into Tyreek Hill for apparently no reason there, even though he was restrained and surrounded.
And on the ground, because it's a tall dude.
They picked him up, and it looked like one of the officers struck him, and they put him back on the ground. I mean, there's a lot going on there.
All of those officers for a traffic stop.
Yeah, you needed multiple officers for, a minor traffic incident with one individual who likely to be a professional football player who's likely not going to be causing any sort of ruckus or commotion. And apparently another of his teammates stepped in and tried to de-escalate the situation. And that individual was also handcuffed by the police. So this is completely out of control. And I just largely wanted to bring this up in terms of I know there's a lot of, political discourse over, what role should the police serve in your community and whether they are,
that's not it. Whatever it is, it ain't that. That's for sure.
I am generally of a mindset of police do serve a valuable role in communities, sometimes in some cases, but there's absolutely no reason that most of the police force needs to be armed and act like some sort of like you're supposed to serve the community and protect the community more. Yeah. Look, and if you got 5 cops standing around, then 4 too many are there. Yeah. Because obviously,
first of all,
over a traffic stop is insane. And then 2, It's a prominent NFL football player. He's one of the most popular and well-known wide receivers in the league, if not
Some
one of the
say
most
the
popular.
freaking best in the league right now. Like,
Yeah,
seriously.
he's like the Calvin Johnson of his time, even though he's like smaller. But that the fact that the police thought in a crowded situation like this with a high-profile football player that they could just whoop his ass and get away with it, that lets you know that when you're not famous and you're not wealthy, that those police officers down there in Miami-Dade County will beat your ass. And imagine some little small fucking hick town, someone, no offense to small hick towns, what law enforcement is like there and what those people are likely willing to do, given the fact that they think they'll always get away with it and never get caught, never face any kinds of consequences. And if you don't remember, just in case you somehow forgot, Colin Kaepernick got blackballed from the league for taking a knee in silence to protest what? Police brutality. And here we are just a few years later with police brutality being, it's playing
and then, of course,
literally
all
against,
the trolls
yeah,
we're saying the same thing. Well, we don't know what happened before. It's always the same line every time. Well, we don't know what happened before the video.
Well, we don't care what happens before the video because Tyreek Hill was restrained and not a threat and not violent, and he was compliant. Isn't that what them fucking morons always say?
The game, man.
No, well, in that video, he was restrained. He wasn't getting into the game until they decided to release him. So any sort of physical violence inflicted upon Tyreek Hill at that point is assault. It's not part of the job. Totally unnecessary, regardless of what happened.
Exactly. No, that is absolutely true. Because I seriously doubt nobody talked about gunshots. He wasn't shooting out the car, doing 200 miles an hour.
Just trying to get to the game. So, and when that white golfer dude like bumped into the police in his car and they had him arrested, it was outrage against that. Well, we don't have any evidence of Tyreek Hill doing anything remotely close to even be considered assaulting a police officer, and he's getting physically attacked.
Don't forget, drunk ass Madison Cawthorn wrecked a police car when he ran into the back of it, speeding after he. And
I forgot about that.
Ronnie, what's his name? Ronnie Johnson or Ronnie Jackson? Which one?
I think it's Ronnie Jackson.
I think it's Ronnie Johnson too.
Yeah,
See,
Ron
Trump
Johnson
fucked up my brain.
Ron Johnson is a different
But
Republican.
he was drunk and he got pulled over and he was like, "I'm a doctor." And
Ronnie Jackson, former doctor.
Shit.
Ron Johnson, fake electors. You gotta,
So I mean, the Dr. Feelgood Candyman.
Yeah,
but. How many instances have we seen of these non-melanated folk doing shit? And it's just like there's no, and they should, to me, politicians should be held to an even higher standard.
Look, so white people do all this crazy shit in front of the police and the police never get violent. Why is it that they always get violent with black people for no reason? But look, we got to get rid of those cops down there. They got to go the same way the Republican Party did with Madison Cawthorn.
Ron DeSantis gave bonuses. If you've been fired from your police department, come on down here. We don't care about your record.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So all of the bad cops who got fired from their departments, precincts, or sheriff office all over the country, Ron DeSantis invited them down there to become like his private little army to do all kinds of crazy shit with, for all intents and purposes, like immunity. And that's just like a microcosm of what to expect. If Trump gets reelected in November, he'll have, criminal immunity. He won't be able to be held liable for anything he does in abusing the powers of the office of the president. And, he's made it clear one of his plans includes deputizing local law enforcement all over the country to help him engage in all type of Gestapo shit.
Well, in his past 4 rallies, he said, y'all need to be at the polling places. You need to go out there. And so he's dog bullhorning to them. But his last 4 rallies in his sundown towns, he has been saying the same thing. And crazy ass, what's her name? The Globe lady.
What his rallies remind me of? So you remember those movies with like the tall man and the little floating balls, and they would like, the little weapons would come out. It'd be like a razor or a drill or something, and they would like fly into people's head. It was like called Phantasm. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, oh my God.
Yeah,
I did a marathon of Phantasm
Oh, did you? That's hilarious. All right, so in Phantasm, like the protagonists, they would wander around these like small towns in the countryside, inevitably run into like the evil villain, the tall man with the little floating razor robot balls, and it would just infect all of these fucking, low population municipalities. And that's what Trump rallies have become. But before we get out of here, do me a favor. If you're listening to this podcast or watching us on YouTube, if you could, grab a friend of yours and be like, hey man, check out this podcast. They do some dope shit to keep it entertaining. It's light, it's fun, even though they, cover these expansive topics and try and provide you with a bit of information, help us grow a little bit. And if you're watching us on YouTube, if you could hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts in the comments below and give us a thumbs up to help out that algorithm, and rate our podcast, give us 5 stars. And if you don't, I'm inclined to believe that you might be an insurrectionist. And that concludes this episode of Pardon the Insurrection. Bless you.
Thank you.